Buried 20 feet beneath a desolate stretch of Oregon farmland, a rusted shipping container held a terrifying secret. Madeline Hayes and her 7-year-old son, Leo, didn't just vanish into thin air. They were swallowed by the earth. What they endured in the pitch black would break the toughest minds. Oak Haven, Oregon, was the kind of town where unlocked doors were a point of local pride. Surrounded by dense, emerald green pine forests and perpetually blanketed in a thin layer of misty drizzle, it was a quiet place where nothing of consequence ever seemed to happen. That was until the morning of October 14th, 2021. Madeline Hayes was a beloved figure in Oak Haven. As a second-grade teacher at the local elementary school, she was known for her boundless patience and a warm, radiant smile that could disarm the most difficult child. Her son Leo was a bright-eyed 7-year-old who loved dinosaurs and possessed a laugh that echoed through the grocery store aisles. They were the picture of small-town domesticity. But behind the closed doors of their sprawling mid-century modern home on the edge of town, the picture was severely warped. Madeline's husband, Julian Vance, was a wealthy, charismatic real estate developer who had moved to Oak Haven 5 years prior. Julian was a man who commanded the room. He sponsored the Little League teams, paid for the new town hall roof, and always knew exactly what to say. But he was also a man who demanded absolute control. His charm was a meticulously crafted mask that hid a deeply possessive and unhinged psychological architecture. When Madeline and Leo failed to show up for the annual Autumn Festival, an event Madeline herself had helped organize, the town's collective anxiety began to simmer. By 8 p.m., Julian called the police, his voice trembling with what sounded like sheer, unadulterated panic. Detective Harrison Miller, a 20-year veteran of the force who had traded the homicide desks of Portland for the quiet pines of Oak Haven, took the call. When Miller arrived at the Vance residence, the scene was chillingly pristine. There were no signs of a struggle. Madeline's purse, containing her wallet, keys, and cell phone, sat untouched on the kitchen island. A half-eaten bowl of oatmeal sat on the table, the spoon resting gently against the ceramic. Leo's favorite yellow raincoat was still hanging by the door. It was as if they had simply evaporated mid-morning. Julian sat on the edge of the leather sofa, his head in his hands, performing the role of the shattered patriarch to perfection. She was just going to water the plants in the greenhouse, Julian choked out, wiping a dry eye. I was in my study on a conference call. When I came out, they were gone. Harrison, you have to find them. Please. But Detective Miller had spent too many years looking into the eyes of liars to be easily swayed by a trembling lip. Something about Julian's grief felt rehearsed, like a scene from a bad play. The timing was too neat. The house too clean. Over the next 3 weeks, the disappearance of Madeline and Leo consumed Oak Haven. Search parties combed the sprawling forests, helicopters scanned the rivers, and national news networks parked their vans on the town green. Julian held daily press conferences, offering a $100,000 reward for any information, weeping for the cameras, and begging for his family's safe return. Behind the scenes, however, Detective Miller was quietly pulling at threads. He started by interviewing the neighbors, a tedious process that yielded little, until he sat down with Beatrice Gable. Beatrice was an 80-year-old insomniac who lived a quarter mile down the road from the Vance estate. Julian Vance is a snake in a tailored suit, Beatrice told Miller, pouring him a cup of weak tea. A month ago, maybe 2, I saw heavy machinery moving up the old logging road behind his property. Excavators. Dump trucks. At 2 in the morning, detective. Who digs dirt in the dead of night? Miller immediately pulled the property records. Julian owned 300 acres of undeveloped forest behind their house. Miller then began a deep, forensic dive into Julian's business finances. He bypassed the local banks and subpoenaed records from Julian's offshore holding companies. It took days of untangling a web of shell corporations, but Miller finally found an anomaly. A company named Aegis Holdings had purchased a heavy-duty 40-foot steel shipping container, an industrial air filtration system, and 6 months' worth of military-grade survival rations. The delivery address wasn't a warehouse. It was a set of GPS coordinates located deep within Julian's undeveloped acreage. Miller's blood ran cold. This wasn't a kidnapping for ransom. This wasn't a runaway wife. This was a premeditated burial. Without waiting for a formal search warrant for the specific coordinates, fearing Julian would catch wind and destroy evidence, Miller gathered a small, trusted tactical team. Under the cover of a torrential downpour, they hiked 3 miles into the dense Oregon woods, following the GPS ping. What they found was a clearing that had been meticulously camouflaged with freshly planted pine saplings and dead brush. Beneath a layer of synthetic turf and topsoil, they discovered a heavy steel hatch secured by a biometric padlock. Miller knelt in the mud, staring at the hatch. He pressed his ear against the cold, wet steel, holding his breath. Faintly, almost imperceptibly over the sound of the rain, he heard it, a rhythmic, muffled thumping. To understand the sheer terror of what lay beneath that steel hatch, one had to go back 32 days to the morning Madeline and Leo vanished. Madeline didn't remember being taken. Her last memory was standing in her kitchen, pouring milk into Leo's oatmeal. Julian had walked up behind her, kissed the back of her neck, and handed her a mug of coffee. "Drink up, darling. Big day today," he had whispered. The coffee was laced with a heavy dose of Rohypnol and a proprietary muscle, relaxant Julian had procured from a black market pharmaceutical contact. When Madeline finally opened her eyes, the world was a void of absolute suffocating darkness. The air was thick, heavy, and smelled distinctly of rusted iron, damp earth, and chemical astringent. The ground beneath her was freezing cold and corrugated. Panic, sharp and visceral, clawed at her throat. She tried to scream, but her mouth was dry, her tongue feeling like sandpaper. She blindly reached out, her hands scraping against cold, ribbed steel walls. "Mommy?" The small, terrified voice sliced through the darkness. "Leo!" Madeline gasped, scrambling forward on her hands and knees until she collided with her son's small frame. She pulled him into her chest, burying her face in his hair. He was shaking violently. Suddenly, a harsh, fluorescent strip of LED lights flickered on, momentarily blinding them. As their eyes adjusted to the stark blue-white glare, the reality of their nightmare materialized. They were inside a 40-foot shipping container. The walls had been hastily insulated with spray foam. At one end sat a chemical toilet and a crude sink attached to a large plastic water reservoir. At the other end was a towering stack of canned goods, dried rice, and bottled water. Above them, a thick PVC pipe protruded from the ceiling, humming faintly an active ventilation system. Before Madeline could process the horror, a sudden burst of static crackled from a small black speaker mounted in the upper corner of the container. "Good morning, my loves." Julian's voice was smooth, distorted only slightly by the cheap electronics, yet dripping with a terrifying calmness. Leo whimpered, burying his face deeper into Madeline's sweater. Madeline stared up at the speaker, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Julian!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Julian, what is this? Let us out right now." "I can't do that, Maddie," Julian replied, his tone resembling a disappointed parent. "The world out there. It's too chaotic. It's dangerous. You were pulling away from me. You were looking at apartments in Portland. Did you really think I wouldn't find your browser history? Did you think I would just let you take my son and dismantle our family?" Madeline's blood turned to ice. He knew. She had been planning her escape for 6 months, squirrel away cash, searching for a way to untangle herself from his psychological abuse. "I have built a sanctuary for us," Julian continued, the delusion bleeding through his words. "Down there, no one can influence you. Down there, you belong to me. You have food, you have water, and you have each other. I will come down and visit when I feel you've learned to appreciate the family you have." The speaker clicked off, leaving behind a deafening silence broken only by the mechanical hum of the air pipe. Madeline realized in that agonizing moment that screaming was useless, bargaining with a madman was futile. They were 20 feet underground, buried alive in a metal tomb, and no one knew where they were. If she panicked, Leo would panic. If she lost her mind, they would both die in the dark. She took a deep, shaky breath, forcing the terror down into a tight, hard box in the back of her mind. She looked down at Leo, whose eyes were wide with a fear no 7-year-old should ever know. Madeline forced a smile. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. "Leo," she said, her voice steady, masking the hysteria threatening to consume her. "Do you remember those books we read about the astronauts? About the brave people who go on secret missions in space?" Leo nodded slowly, a tear streaking through the dirt on his cheek. "Well, Daddy built us a spaceship," Madeline lied beautifully. "We are on a top-secret mission to Mars. It's a very long journey, and it's going to be tough. We have to be brave, just like the astronauts. Can you be my co-pilot?" Leo hesitated, looking around the bleak, metal walls. "Are there aliens on Mars?" he whispered. "No aliens," Madeline promised, kissing his forehead. "Just us. But we have to stick to the mission protocols." Thus began their grim routine. Madeline structured their days meticulously to stave off the crushing weight of isolation. Without sunlight, time was an abstract concept. She measured the passing hours by the clicks of the battery-powered digital clock Julian had left them. Morning consisted of calisthenics, jumping jacks, and stretches to keep their muscles from atrophying. Afternoon was for schooling. Madeline used a stick of charcoal she found near the air vent to draw math problems and spelling words on the metal walls. They played endless games of I Spy. In a room with only 50 objects. They built forts out of the empty cardboard boxes from the rations. But the physical toll was unavoidable. The chemical toilet stank violently, filling the confined space with noxious fumes. The food was heavily salted, military-grade sludge that left them perpetually thirsty, but Madeline had to strictly ration the water from the plastic drum, terrifyingly aware that when it was gone, it was gone. The LED lights, powered by a car battery system Julian had wired outside, began to dim after 2 weeks, casting long, monstrous shadows across the walls. Julian's psychological torture was relentless. Every few days, the speaker would crackle to life. Sometimes he would play recordings of his press conferences, letting Madeline hear the town searching for her, letting her hear him play the victim. Other times he would simply sit at the microphone and eat a hot meal, describing the taste of a medium-rare steak or fresh strawberries, while they choked down cold, canned beans. "Just say you're sorry, Madeline," Julian would croon through the static. "Say you'll never try to leave me again, and I'll bring down a hot pizza for Leo." Madeline never answered. She knew that the moment she broke, the moment she surrendered her autonomy to his twisted game, she would lose whatever fragment of her soul kept her fighting. Instead, while Julian taunted them, she would cover Leo's ears and sing him to sleep. By day 25, the real crisis hit. The low, comforting hum of the PVC ventilation pipe, their only source of oxygen, suddenly sputtered, coughed, and died. The silence that followed was heavier than the dirt above them. Within hours, the air inside the container grew stale and thick. The temperature plummeted. Condensation dripped from the ceiling, mixing with the rust to form blood-like streaks down the walls. Leo began to cough, his breathing growing shallow and rapid. "Mommy," he gasped, his chest heaving. "My head hurts. The spaceship is broken." Madeline scrambled to the pipe, pressing her hands against it. Nothing. The fan above ground had either failed or Julian had deliberately turned it off to force her submission. The carbon dioxide levels in the sealed metal box were rising rapidly. They were slowly suffocating. Desperation, primal and violent, finally took over. Madeline grabbed an empty metal tin of beans and began to smash it against the reinforced steel door at the end of the container. Clang! 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 Her hands blistered and bled. The metal tin warped and crushed under the force. She struck the steel until her muscles screamed and her vision blurred at the edges from lack of oxygen. She was not going to let her son die in the dark. She would beat the walls until her bones shattered. Clang, clang, clang. Up above, through 20 feet of compacted soil and Oregon mud, Detective Harrison Miller pressed his ear to the hatch, listening to the desperate rhythm of a mother fighting for her child's life. Clang, clang, clang. The muffled, rhythmic strikes vibrating through the muddy topsoil were the most beautiful sounds Detective Harrison Miller had ever heard. It was the undeniable pulse of survival. "We have signs of life. Get the breaching gear up here now." Miller roared over the torrential downpour, his voice cracking with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. The tactical team, clad in heavy Kevlar and dripping wet, surged forward through the slick Oregon mud. Officer Jenkins, the team's designated breacher, slid into the muck beside the steel hatch. He took one look at the heavy biometric padlock and the reinforced steel hinges. "I can't pick this, boss. It's military grade. I need the thermal torch. We have to burn it off." "Do it!" Miller commanded, wiping a stream of freezing rain from his eyes. "But do it fast. If that ventilation system is dead, we are racing a biological clock. They are breathing poison down there." Sparks erupted into the black night, a blinding fountain of white-hot magnesium slicing through the gloom. The smell of ozone and burning metal mixed violently with the scent of wet pine. Below ground, the roar of the torch was magnified 100-fold. Inside the container, Madeline stopped striking the door. The tin in her hand was a mangled knot of sharp edges. Her palms were slick with her own blood, but she didn't feel the pain. The deafening hiss from the ceiling sounded like a dragon tearing through the earth. "He's coming," she thought, panic seizing her lungs. "Julian knows the vent is off. He's coming to finish it. He's welding us in." "Mommy?" Leo wheezed, his voice barely a whisper. He was lying on the corrugated floor, his small chest struggling to pull oxygen from the dead, heavy air. The carbon dioxide had settled near the floor, poisoning him faster than her. "I'm here, baby," Madeline gasped, her own vision beginning to swim with grey static. She crawled to him, grabbing the heavy, rusted flashlight Julian had left them. She positioned herself directly beneath the hatch, her knees trembling, ready to swing at whatever monster came down that ladder. Above, the massive steel lock finally gave way with a sickening crack. Miller and Jenkins grabbed the heavy iron handle, planted their boots in the mud, and heaved. With a grinding screech, the hatch flew open, slamming backward into the dirt. A wave of foul, dead air rushed up from the black shaft, smelling of human despair and rusted iron. Miller immediately shone his high-powered tactical flashlight down the 20-foot shaft. "Police! Madeline! We are the police! Are you down there?" Miller shouted. Madeline dropped the flashlight. The beam of light was so agonizingly bright after 32 days in the dark that she threw her arms over her eyes, crying out, but the word "police" shattered the terrible illusion Julian had built. "Leo!" Madeline screamed, her voice hoarse and broken. "Help my son! He can't breathe!" "Medic! Oxygen lines now!" Miller yelled, swinging his legs over the lip of the shaft. He descended rapidly, his boots clanging against the iron rungs. When he hit the floor, the stark horror of the container hit him like a physical blow. The stench was unbearable, the walls covered in dark condensation. There was Madeline, looking like a ghost, clutching a small, motionless bundle. Miller unclipped a portable oxygen mask from his belt and secured it over Leo's face, noting the terrifying blue tint to the boy's lips. "I've got him, Madeline. Let's get you out of here." But as Miller strapped a rescue harness around Leo's waist, a sharp, deafening crack echoed from the surface above, followed instantly by the shouting of his men and the zip of a bullet striking a tree trunk. "Shots fired!" Jenkins' voice screamed through Miller's shoulder radio. "Boss, we are taking fire from the tree line. It's Vance. He's got a hunting rifle." Julian Vance hadn't been waiting at home. Driven by his paranoid need for absolute control, Julian had wired the surrounding forest with motion sensors. Unwilling to let his prized possessions be taken, he had driven up the old logging road, armed with a high-powered 30-06. "Get away from my family!" Julian's voice echoed through the dark woods. "They belong to me." "Down in the container," Madeline froze. Julian's voice over the radio sent a jolt of pure, paralyzing terror through her nervous system. She pressed herself against the cold metal wall, hyperventilating. "Listen to me," Miller said, grabbing her shoulders. "He is not taking you back. I will die before I let that man put his hands on you again." Above ground, the situation was deteriorating. Julian was pinned behind a massive fallen oak, taking potshots at the officers. "I have a dead man's switch," Julian lied, screaming into the rain, desperate for leverage. "I buried 50 pounds of tannerite. You try to pull them out, I blow the whole site." Miller knew Julian's psychological profile. Julian was a narcissist. He wanted to win, not die. The bomb was a bluff. "Jenkins." Miller keyed his radio, whispering furiously. "Hold your fire. Keep him talking. I need Officer Davies to flank him wide left. Vance is focused on the hatch." Miller hooked Madeline into the second harness. He climbed back up the ladder, emerging just enough to expose his head over the rim of the hatch into the blinding rain. "Julian!" Miller roared over the storm. "It's over! Madeline doesn't want your sanctuary. She's leaving you. She beat you." It was the ultimate insult to Julian's fragile ego. The idea that his wife had outsmarted him broke the last remaining threads of his sanity. "She is mine!" Julian shrieked, breaking his cover and standing up from behind the oak tree, raising the rifle to aim directly at Miller's head. In that split second of exposure, Officer Davies, crouched 30 yards away in the heavy brush, squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, a sharp retort that silenced the forest. Julian's rifle dropped as the bullet shattered his right collarbone. He collapsed backward into the mud, screaming in pain, instantly swarmed by 3 tactical officers who pinned him to the ground and slapped heavy iron cuffs on his wrists. "All clear! Suspect is down and in custody!" Jenkins yelled, out of breath. Miller exhaled a breath he felt he had been holding for an eternity. "Winch them up," he ordered, looking down into the dark shaft. "Get them into the light." The journey back to the surface felt like ascending from purgatory. As the mechanical winch pulled Madeline up through the narrow steel shaft, the cold, fresh air hit her face like a physical wave. When she breached the surface, the tactical officers gently laid her in the wet grass. She opened her eyes, squinting against the rain. She had never seen anything so beautiful as the chaotic, stormy Oregon night sky. There were no stars, only heavy grey clouds and freezing rain, but to Madeline, it was heaven. It was vast. It was open. Paramedics swarmed them instantly. Leo was rushed to a waiting medevac helicopter that had landed in a nearby clearing, its rotors whipping the pine trees into a frenzy. Madeline refused a stretcher, demanding to ride in the helicopter, sitting on the metal floor beside her son's stretcher, holding his small, pale hand the entire flight to Portland General Hospital. The recovery was agonizingly slow. Leo spent 4 days in the pediatric intensive care unit, his lungs heavily inflamed from the carbon dioxide, his body fighting off severe malnutrition and a vitamin D deficiency that bordered on rickets. Madeline's physical wounds, the scurvy, the muscle atrophy, the torn and infected flesh on her hands, were treated with a barrage of antibiotics and physical therapy. But the psychological scars ran much deeper. For the first 2 weeks in the hospital, Madeline couldn't sleep if the door to her room was closed. The sudden hum of an air conditioner or the click of a locking mechanism would send her into violent panic attacks. She required the blinds to be open at all times, desperate to see the sun, terrified that if she looked away, she would wake up back in the rusted iron box. Oakhaven, meanwhile, reeled from the shock. The town that prided itself on unlocked doors was suddenly confronted with the monster who had funded their little league teams. The community rallied around Madeline and Leo with fierce protectiveness. Beatrice Gable organized a meal train that kept the hospital room overflowing with home-cooked food. Detective Miller visited every single day, sitting quietly in the corner, reading comic books to Leo while Madeline slept. 7 months later, the physical healing had progressed enough for the real battle to begin. The state of Oregon versus Julian Vance. The trial was a media circus. National news anchors lined the steps of the Oak Haven courthouse. Inside the grand oak-paneled courtroom, District Attorney Evelyn Reed, a razor-sharp prosecutor with a reputation for merciless cross-examinations, led the charge. Julian's defense attorney, a high-priced shark named Donovan Pierce, flown in from Los Angeles, attempted to paint Julian as a tragically misguided survivalist. Pierce argued that Julian truly believed a catastrophic societal collapse was imminent and that he had buried his family out of a warped sense of love and protection, not malice. He pleaded temporary insanity, claiming Julian's mind had snapped under the pressure of his business. But Evelyn Reed had a smoking gun that blew the defense out of the water. During the raid on the Vance estate, Detective Miller had seized Julian's computers. Hidden behind multiple encrypted firewalls on a personal hard drive, cyber forensics found a horrifying collection of audio files. Julian had recorded his own broadcasts into the container. He had sat in his luxurious, leather-bound study, sipping expensive scotch, and recorded himself taunting his starving wife and terrified child. He had listened to their muffled cries for his own sick entertainment. When Reed played the audio for the jury, the courtroom fell into a deathly, horrified silence. The sound of Julian smoothly eating a steak while Leo cried for water echoed off the wooden walls. One juror physically threw up in a trash can. Julian sat at the defense table, his arm still in a sling from Davy's bullet, staring straight ahead, his mask of charm finally, permanently destroyed. The climax of the trial, however, was Madeline. When she took the stand, she did not look like a victim. She wore a sharp navy blazer, her posture straight, her voice clear and unwavering. Donovan Pierce tried to rattle her during cross-examination, trying to suggest she had voluntarily gone to the container to look at Julian's preparations. Madeline cut him off, her eyes locking directly onto Julian across the room. "He didn't want to protect us," Madeline told the hushed courtroom, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "He wanted to own us. He buried us alive because he knew I was strong enough to leave him, and he was too weak to let me go. But he made a miscalculation in that dark box. You didn't bury a wife, Julian. You forged a survivor, and you will never, ever have power over us again." It took the jury less than 2 hours to deliberate. Julian Vance was found guilty on all charges, including 2 counts of attempted murder, aggravated kidnapping, and torture. The judge handed down a sentence of 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. A year after the rescue, Oak Haven was quiet once more. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was the peaceful silence of a storm that had passed. Madeline and Leo did not move away. They refused to let Julian's shadow chase them from their home. Madeline sold the massive, cold estate and bought a small, sunlit cottage near the center of town. She returned to teaching 2nd grade, her classroom brighter and more joyful than ever before. Leo went back to school, his resilience proving to be a miracle in itself. He still slept with a nightlight, and he didn't like small spaces, but his laughter returned, echoing once again through the grocery store aisles. In the spring, Madeline and Leo returned to the undeveloped acreage behind their old house. The heavy machinery of the state had unearthed the metal container and hauled it away for scrap, leaving a massive, muddy crater in the earth. Together, with the help of Detective Miller and Beatrice Gable, they spent the weekend filling the crater with fresh soil. They planted dozens of oak saplings and scattered seeds for wild Oregon lupines and fireweed. Where a tomb of iron and terror had once suffocated them, life was beginning to bloom under the open, endless sky. They had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and they had emerged into the light, forever changed, but entirely unbroken. Madeline and Leo's harrowing descent into darkness proves that even in the most suffocating circumstances, a mother's love and the human will to survive can shatter walls of steel. If this true story of unimaginable resilience inspired you, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life survival stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.